All right, so let's jump right in. Have you ever stopped to think about how your weather app knows it's going to rain or how your social media feed just magically updates? The secret sauce behind all of that is usually something called a RESTful API. It's kind of like this invisible engine humming along in the background. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain and see how a few simple rules created this, well, universal language that pretty much powers our entire digital world.
So, let's start with a really basic question. How do your favorite apps, the ones on your phone, the websites you visit, how do they actually talk to the internet? I mean, they have to get their information from somewhere, right? They need a shared language, a common set of rules for that conversation to even happen. And you guessed it, that's where our story really kicks off. Okay, so here's the plan for this explainer. First up, we're going to cover what an API even is. Then we'll dig into the rules of REST. After that, we'll listen in on the actual API conversation. We'll also look at what makes an API truly great. And finally, we'll tackle the big one, why this super simple idea basically won the internet.
All right, let's get into it. To really understand REST, we've got to start with the foundation, and that foundation is three little letters, API. So what is an API? Well, the fancy name is Application Programming Interface, but really, it's just a way for two different computer programs to talk to each other. That's it. Think of it like a contract. It says, hey, if you ask me for information in this exact way, I promise to give you a response in this exact way. You know, a great analogy is a waiter in a restaurant. You don't go into the kitchen yourself. You give your order to the waiter, and they handle the communication with the kitchen and bring the food back to you. The API is that waiter.
Okay, so if an API is the waiter, where does REST fit in? Well, REST, and that stands for Representational State Transfer, is basically the most popular style guide for how that waiter should behave. It's not a strict law, it's more like a set of really good architectural rules that pretty much everyone agreed on back in the early 2000s. And when an API follows these rules, we call it a RESTful API. And trust me, these things are everywhere. You've got huge companies like Twilio, Stripe, Google Maps. They all offer these powerful RESTful APIs so that other developers can build cool stuff on top of their services. And really, I'm not kidding. Almost every single web and mobile app you use every day is powered by REST APIs talking to servers in the background. So you might be wondering, how does REST actually organize everything? How does it keep all this communication from becoming a total mess? Well, it all boils down to one really simple but super powerful idea. And that big idea is the resource. In the world of REST, everything is a resource. A user, that's a resource. A product you're looking at online, resource. A photo, a blog post, you get the idea. And every single one of these resources gets its own unique address called a URI. It's just like a web address or like how every house on a street has its own mailing address. It's a unique identifier.
And this leads us to a really fundamental rule in REST design. It's all about nouns, not verbs. The address, the URI, should identify the thing you care about, the noun, like /products. It should not describe the action you want to perform, like /getAllProducts. See the difference? So instead of some clunky thing like /getUserById123, it's just a clean, simple /users/123. This one rule makes everything so much more predictable and easy to work with.
Okay, great. So we've got our addresses, right? Our nouns, but now what? How do we actually do stuff with them? Well, this is where we finally get to the conversation part, and it all happens using a standard set of action words. This is where we bring in the verbs. We take those nice, clean, noun-based addresses and we pair them with an HTTP verb to tell the server what action to take. For example, if you want to create a new product, you'd use post. If you want to read or get information about a product, you use get. Want to update it? Use put. And to get rid of it, you use delete. Create, read, update, delete, these are the absolute core operations, and you'll often hear people call them by their acronym, CRUD. But wait, this conversation isn't just a one-way street. After your app makes a request, the server has to reply. And the very first thing it sends back isn't the data you asked for, it's a status code. You can think of it as a super quick, instant message back saying, yep, got it, or I don't understand what you want, or even, oops, something broke on my end. This feedback is absolutely crucial. If you see a code in the 200s like the classic 200 OK, that's good news. It means success. Everything worked just like it was supposed to. Now, a code in the 400s means there was a client error. You've definitely seen the most famous one, 404 not found. This is basically the server pointing a finger back at you and saying, hey, you messed up. The mistake is in your request.
And finally, if you get a 500-level code, that means the server itself messed up. Maybe its database went down. Maybe there's a bug in its code. This time, the server is raising its hand and saying, yep, this one's on me.
So there you have it, the basic back and forth of a RESTful API. But knowing the rules is one thing. What really separates a basic functional API from a truly great one that developers actually enjoy using? Well, it comes down to a few key hallmarks.
We can think of it as three main pillars. First up is statelessness. This is a big one. It just means the server doesn't remember anything about you from one request to the next. Every request is treated as a fresh start, which makes it way easier to scale up and handle tons of users. Second is pagination. Imagine asking for a list of all products and getting 1 million of them back at once. That would crash everything. A good API breaks that huge list into smaller pages you can ask for one at a time. And third, versioning. You'll often see something like /v1 in the URL. This is so important because it lets the creators update their API, maybe create a v2, without breaking all the older apps that are still relying on version 1.
Okay, so we've covered the whole shebang now, from resources and verbs to status codes and what makes a good API. This all leads us to the final and maybe most important question. Why? Why did this particular way of doing things become the king of the internet?
And this quote right here really nails it. You have to remember, before REST came along, the alternatives were often super complicated, just a total headache to work with. REST wasn't a silver bullet. It wasn't the most high-tech, feature-packed solution out there. But for most things people needed to do on the web, it was just simple and good enough. And that turned out to be its superpower.
And really, that's the secret. It just hit this perfect sweet spot. It gave us a predictable, structured way for all these different systems to talk to each other, but without all the insane complexity. It was this focus on simplicity that let it spread like wildfire and become the standard way we build for the web. So that leads us to a pretty interesting thought. If REST is the good enough standard that built the web as we know it, what could possibly be better? What are its limitations, and what do newer things like GraphQL or gRPC bring to the table? Well, that's a story for another explainer. Thanks so much for tuning in.